The ranch owner thought he'd never have an heir, but the Apache woman proved his doctors wrong. Jacob Carter stood at the edge of his land, the wind biting at his face, and stared out at the sprawling ranch. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It should have been beautiful, the kind of scene that made people pause and take in the wonders of life. But to Jacob, it was just another reminder of everything he had lost. For years, Jacob had poured his heart into the land. He had grown the ranch from a small patch of dirt into one of the largest cattle operations in the region. The land had been good to him, and he had worked hard to honor that gift. But in the deepest corners of his mind, there was a growing emptiness, a hollow spot that no amount of wealth or success could fill. Jacob had always known the importance of family. It was why he worked so hard, to leave something behind for his future children, to pass on his legacy. But with every passing year, that dream seemed to slip further away. His doctor had told him more than once that it was hopeless. He would never have children. His body simply wasn't capable of it. The silence of the evening air settled over him like a heavy cloak. Jacob closed his eyes for a moment, imagining what his life could have been if things had been different. He had once thought he would marry, build a home with a wife, and raise children to take over the ranch. But now, all those dreams seemed so far out of reach. "Guess it's time to sell," Jacob muttered to himself. He had considered it many times before. The thought of passing on the ranch to someone else wasn't a comforting one, but without an heir, what else was there to do? He wasn't getting any younger, and the land would be wasted if it was left in the wrong hands. As if on cue, the sound of hooves echoed in the distance, snapping Jacob out of his thoughts. He turned, squinting to see who was coming down the trail. At first he thought it was just another cattle buyer, but as the rider drew closer, Jacob noticed something strange. The figure was a woman, riding alone, with the kind of confidence only someone who had spent a lifetime in the saddle could possess. She was dressed in a simple but well-worn outfit, a buckskin jacket and a wide-brimmed hat that shielded her face from the sun. The woman reined in her horse just a few feet from Jacob, and he couldn't help but feel a flash of curiosity. Who was this? "Can I help you?" Jacob asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The woman nodded, her dark eyes locking onto his. "I'm looking for work," she said, her voice low but firm. "I can help with the ranch. I'm a good hand." Jacob studied her for a moment. He had heard rumors about an Apache woman who had been traveling through the area, but he hadn't expected to meet her like this. He wasn't sure what to make of it. "I don't usually hire outsiders," Jacob said, his voice guarded. The woman didn't flinch. "I'm not asking for charity," she said. "I've worked cattle before. I know how to fix fences, ride and tend to the horses. I'm not looking for an easy job, just a fair one." Jacob raised an eyebrow, sizing her up. She wasn't offering him much to go on, but there was something about her that caught his attention. She wasn't asking for handouts, and there was no hesitation in her voice. She knew what she was capable of. "I'll give you a trial run," Jacob said finally. "If you can prove yourself, I'll consider hiring you for longer." "Thank you," she said simply, before turning her horse and heading toward the barn. Jacob watched her ride off, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. He hadn't expected to feel so uneasy about her arrival. Maybe it was because he didn't know what kind of person she was or where she had come from. But something about her presence lingered, and for the first time in a long while, Jacob found himself intrigued. A heavy blur of work with the woman. Tala, as she introduced herself, jumping right into the tasks Jacob set before her. He watched her as she worked, moving with the grace of someone who had spent their life in the saddle. She was strong, capable, and sharp. Every time Jacob gave her a new task, she completed it without complaint or hesitation. Her skill with the horses was impressive, and she didn't flinch when it came time to work with the cattle. She had a quiet determination, a steady hand that spoke of years of experience. Jacob found himself relying on her more than he had intended. She made his life easier in ways he hadn't anticipated. But with each passing day, the emptiness inside Jacob grew heavier. He knew it wasn't just the work that kept him around the ranch anymore. It was the woman. Tala had a presence about her that drew him in. Her calm, quiet demeanor was like a balm to his restless soul. He found himself sharing more with her than he had with anyone in years. His thoughts, his worries, his dreams of the future. Despite his growing feelings for her, Jacob remained distant. He couldn't afford to get attached. She was an outsider, someone who didn't belong in his world. Besides, he couldn't risk falling for someone when he knew his life had no real future to offer. The evenings grew colder as winter settled over the land. Jacob spent more time in his office, poring over old ledgers, trying to keep his mind occupied. But every time he looked out the window, he saw Tala working in the barn or riding the trails with the same grace and strength that had first caught his attention. As Christmas neared, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that his life was slipping away. He had no heir to carry on the family name, no legacy to leave behind. His ranch, his dreams, would all fade into nothing when he was gone. He didn't have the courage to face that reality, but deep down, he knew it was true. The ranch had become his whole world, but without a family to share it with, what did it matter? The cold winds of winter seemed to have settled in for good. The land, usually vibrant with life, was now wrapped in a blanket of snow, and Jacob Carter spent more hours indoors than he cared to admit. But despite the chill, there was a new warmth in his life, one he hadn't expected. Tala had become more than just a ranch hand to him. She had become a steady presence, someone who made his days feel less empty. He watched her from a distance as she worked. Her movements were swift, precise, and confident. She didn't speak much, but there was a quiet strength in everything she did. It was hard not to notice. Whether it was fixing a fence, guiding the cattle through the cold, or taming the wild horses, she handled every task with a grace that Jacob couldn't help but admire. One morning, as the sun barely peeked over the hills, Jacob found himself at the barn with Tala. They had just finished feeding the horses, and now it was time to take the cattle out to the field. Jacob stood by the door, watching her as she brushed down one of the horses, her focus entirely on the task at hand. "Need any help?" Jacob asked, his voice breaking the silence between them. Tala looked up, meeting his gaze. "You're welcome to join," she said simply, offering a small smile. Jacob wasn't used to working alongside someone, especially not someone who seemed to know more about the ranch than he did. But there was something in her eyes, a quiet trust, that made him want to spend more time with her. Something about her steadiness, her calm, was unlike anything he had known before. The two worked together in silence as they led the cattle out of the barn. As they moved through the snow-covered pastures, Jacob noticed how easily Tala fell into the rhythm of the ranch. She seemed to understand the animals, the land, the weather, everything in a way that felt almost like second nature. "You've done this before," Jacob said as he rode beside her. "I have," she replied, her tone calm but matter-of-fact. "Grew up on a ranch back home. Where's home for you?" Tala's eyes darkened for a moment, and she seemed to hesitate. It was as if the question had stirred something deep inside her, something she wasn't ready to share. But then she looked at him, her expression softening. "I was raised on a small Apache reservation," she said quietly. "My family worked the land just like this. It's what I know best." He knew that sometimes people didn't want to share parts of their past. He had his own scars, after all, some that he didn't share with anyone. As the days went on, their bond seemed to deepen. Jacob found himself looking forward to the moments when they would work together. There was something undeniably soothing about the way Tala worked, the way she didn't waste words and focused on the task at hand. It was a quality Jacob admired, especially since he himself had spent so many years talking around his problems instead of confronting them. One evening, after a long day of work, Jacob and Tala sat together by the fire in the barn. The warmth of the flames crackled in the quiet space, and the only sound was the occasional snort of the horses outside. Jacob had never been much of a talker, but there was something about Tala that made him feel at ease. "Do you ever miss your family?" he asked, his voice low. Tala was quiet for a moment, her gaze focused on the fire. "Sometimes," she said slowly. "I miss the quiet of the reservation, the way the land feels alive with history. But I found peace here, too." Jacob nodded. He knew what she meant. The ranch had become his refuge in the same way, a place where he could get away from the world and its demands. But the quiet also brought loneliness, and he had come to realize that. It wasn't something he could ignore any longer. As they sat there, the silence stretched between them, neither of them feeling the need to break it. There was a comfort in simply being in the same space. Two people from different worlds, but finding a shared understanding. "You know," Jacob said after a while, "I never expected this place to feel so empty." Tala turned her head slightly, her brow furrowing. "Empty?" Jacob's shoulders sagged slightly. "I've worked this land my whole life, built it into something that could last. But without someone to pass it on to, what's the point? It feels like I've been chasing something I'll never catch." Tala looked at him, her gaze soft and thoughtful. "Maybe the point isn't in passing it on. Maybe the point is in living it, in making it worth something now, not just for the future." Jacob glanced at her, surprised by her words. She spoke with a clarity that made him reconsider his own perspective. For years he had been focused on the future, the idea of leaving behind a legacy, but Tala was showing him that the present was just as important. The days began to grow longer as the cold winter started to fade into the warmth of spring. Jacob and Tala continued to work together, and with every passing day, Jacob found himself more and more captivated by her presence. It wasn't just the way she handled the ranch or the horses, it was the way she handled him. There was something about her that brought him a sense of calm he had never known before. One evening, as they worked late into the night, Jacob caught himself watching Tala again. She was so focused on adjusting the fence line, her movements fluid and natural. He had to admit there was a beauty in her that he hadn't expected to find. She wasn't like the women he'd known in the past, the ones who were drawn to wealth or status. Tala didn't care about any of that. She cared about the land, about the work, and in that, she was different from anyone Jacob had ever met. "Why did you come here?" Jacob asked suddenly, his voice quiet but full of curiosity. Tala paused, looking up at him with a thoughtful expression. "I needed to get away. To find something real. Something that wasn't tied to my past, something that wasn't decided for me." He could relate to the feeling. He too had spent years trying to run from the past, trying to prove something to the world and to himself. But now, with Tala by his side, he was starting to understand that maybe he had been running in the wrong direction. They stood there for a moment, the evening light casting long shadows on the land. Jacob didn't know what the future held for them, or even if Tala would stay for long, but he knew one thing for sure. His life had already changed in ways he couldn't have predicted, and for the first time in a long while, Jacob felt a glimmer of hope for what lay ahead. The days had grown warmer as spring slowly crept over the ranch, bringing with it the promise of new life. The once cold, barren fields were now beginning to show signs of growth, and the ranch was alive with activity. The cattle were moved to greener pastures, the horses were being trained for the summer's work, and the air was filled with the sounds of birds and the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. Jacob had never felt so busy in his life, but there was something different now. There was a sense of purpose that had been missing for years, and it wasn't just the work that kept him going. It was Tala. As the months passed, Jacob found himself growing more and more drawn to her. Her presence on the ranch had become as necessary as the very land they worked on. He looked forward to their conversations, their time spent together, even if they were in silence, side by side, working towards the same goal. There was a comfort in her presence, something that soothed the restlessness in his chest. But despite the growing connection, Jacob kept his distance. He couldn't allow himself to get too attached. His fears of a future without children still haunted him. He was a man without a legacy, a man who would never pass on his name or his land. Even as his heart began to open to Tala, he kept his emotions locked away, afraid that if he let himself feel too much, the future would become even more uncertain than it already was. Tala, however, seemed to sense his hesitance. She was quieter these days, as if waiting for Jacob to make the first move, to bridge the gap between them that had slowly been forming over the months. It wasn't that she didn't care for him. She had come to rely on him in ways she never thought possible, but there was an understanding between them that the ranch was not just a place to work. It was a place to heal for both of them. One morning, as Jacob sat in his office, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Tala stood in the doorway, her usual calm expression replaced by something Jacob couldn't quite read. She was holding a letter in her hand. "Jacob," she said quietly, "I think you should read this." Jacob took the letter from her, his brow furrowing. He had never seen her look so serious, and the weight of her words made his heart skip a beat. He unfolded the letter, and as he read the first few lines, his world seemed to tilt. The letter was from the doctor. It was official. The infertility that Jacob had been diagnosed with years ago had been a mistake. Somehow, despite everything the doctors had told him, he was capable of having children. Jacob's hands shook as he finished reading. He looked up at Tala, his mind struggling to process the words. But how? This doesn't make any sense. The doctors told me it was impossible. Tala's expression softened as she stepped closer. "Maybe they were wrong," she said quietly. "Maybe this is the miracle you've been waiting for." His mind was racing, a storm of emotions swirling inside him. For years he had accepted the idea that he would never have a family. He had prepared himself for a life without children, without the sound of little feet running through the halls of the ranch. And now, the impossible had happened. The one thing he thought he would never have was suddenly within reach. A child. An heir. Jacob felt a rush of emotions flood through him. Joy, disbelief, fear, hope, all of them mixing together in a way that made his head spin. But the one thought that stood out above all the others was this: he could have a family. The ranch wouldn't die with him. There would be someone to carry on his legacy. Tala watched him, her eyes filled with understanding. "I know it's a lot to take in," she said softly. "But you're not alone in this. You've got me, Jacob." Her words hit him harder than he expected. Jacob had spent so much of his life believing he had to do everything on his own. He had built the ranch by himself, struggled with his fears in silence, and had always carried the weight of his future alone. But now, standing before him, was someone who didn't see his fears. She saw his potential, his future, and she was offering him her support. Jacob felt something shift inside him. The walls he had built around his heart, the ones he had erected to protect himself from disappointment, began to crumble. He wasn't alone anymore. He stepped toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Tala," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say. I never thought this could happen." Tala smiled softly. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that I'm here for you. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The words settled into Jacob's heart like a balm, soothing the anxiety that had been building inside him for years. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't facing it alone. With Tala by his side, he felt like he could face anything. As the days passed, the news of the doctor's letter began to sink in. Jacob's life had changed in a way he never expected, and with it came a new sense of responsibility. He would be a father. He would have a child to raise, to teach, to love. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Tala, too, seemed to adjust to the news with a quiet acceptance. She had never expressed an interest in motherhood, but Jacob could see that she was just as affected by the news as he was. She had her own fears and doubts, but she didn't let them show. Instead, she threw herself into the work, helping Jacob prepare for the new chapter in his life. The ranch began to feel different. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling that something big was coming, something that would change everything. And with each passing day, Jacob realized that this new life, this unexpected miracle, was the beginning of something he had once thought impossible. For the first time in years, Jacob allowed himself to dream of the future, of a future with a child, with Tala, and with a legacy that would live on long after he was gone. But as the seasons changed, Jacob also knew that the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, there would be doubts, and there would be moments when everything seemed uncertain. But with Tala by his side, Jacob felt ready to face whatever came next. Together, they would build a family. Together, they would carry on the legacy of the ranch. And together, they would face the future with hope, no matter what it held. The days leading up to the birth felt like they stretched on forever. Jacob's world had been turned upside down, and now, as the season shifted from spring to summer, there was a new rhythm to his life. It wasn't just the cattle to care for or the land to tend to, it was the future that loomed ahead, uncertain but full of promise. Tala had been the steady force Jacob had needed. Through the weeks leading to the birth, she never wavered. Her calm and quiet strength grounded him. She made the work seem lighter, the days easier. But Jacob noticed that there was something else in her now, a soft tenderness that had not been there before. Her eyes sparkled with a quiet joy that matched his own growing excitement, even though she didn't speak much about it. The ranch had always been Jacob's responsibility, and he had always carried that burden alone. But now, with Tala and the child, it was different. It felt like they were building something together, something worth protecting. Every morning, Jacob would wake to the sound of Tala humming softly as she worked, the sun rising over the hills in the distance. And in the evenings, when the work was done, they would sit together by the fire. It was in those moments that Jacob realized just how much Tala had become a part of his life. One evening, as they sat side by side watching the last rays of daylight fade into the horizon, Jacob spoke up. "I never imagined it would be like this," he said quietly. "When I first met you, I thought you'd be gone by now. Just another hand on the ranch. But you're so much more than that, Tala." Tala looked at him, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'm not going anywhere, Jacob. Not unless you tell me to." "I don't want you to go. I never did." "But I didn't know what to expect, you know. I spent so much of my life alone, trying to do it all by myself." Tala's hand brushed against his, a silent gesture that spoke more than words ever could. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," she said softly. Jacob's heart swelled with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not just hope for the future, but hope that maybe, just maybe, the life he had built on his own would finally come alive. His ranch, his legacy, his dreams, They didn't have to die with him anymore. They had a chance to grow, to live on, in a way he hadn't thought possible. The night of the birth arrived, and it came with the force of a storm. Tala had insisted on working until the very end, not wanting to stop for anything. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, her water broke, and everything changed. Jacob didn't know what to do, but he didn't have time to waste. He quickly called for help, sending one of the ranch hands to fetch the doctor. As the hours stretched on, Jacob stayed by her side. He could see the pain in her eyes, but he also saw her strength. She was so strong, so determined. And as the minutes ticked by, Jacob realized that this was what it meant to build a life together, to share everything, the pain and the joy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the room was filled with the first cries of their child. Jacob's heart nearly stopped at the sound. He had never known such emotion, such a rush of feeling. The baby was small but healthy, a perfect little girl with dark eyes that stared at the world with a quiet curiosity. The doctor handed the baby to Tala, who cradled her gently in her arms. Jacob stood frozen for a moment, unable to believe that this was real, that he was holding his daughter, that he had a family. Tala looked up at him, a soft smile on her face. "She's perfect," she whispered. Jacob stepped closer, his hands trembling as he reached for his daughter. He had never held a newborn before, but as he took her in his arms, it felt as though everything in his life had led to this moment. It felt right, and in that moment, all the uncertainty that had plagued him for so long seemed to fade away. "She's perfect," Jacob repeated, his voice thick with emotion. As they sat together, the three of them in the quiet of the barn, Jacob felt something shift inside him. His whole life had been spent building walls, keeping people at a distance, but now, with Tala and their daughter, he realized that the greatest thing he had ever built wasn't the ranch or the land. It was the family they were creating together. In the weeks that followed, Jacob found himself falling deeper in love with his new life. There was something about being a father that made everything feel more meaningful. Every morning, he would wake up to the sight of his daughter, and every night he would watch as Tala carefully rocked her to sleep. He couldn't help but think that maybe the ranch had never really been his to own. It was theirs now, and together they would build a future that mattered. Tala, too, seemed to settle into her new role. She was a mother, but she was still the woman who had come to the ranch looking for work. She still carried herself with the same quiet strength, but now there was a softness to her that Jacob had never noticed before. She wasn't just the woman who helped him with the cattle or fixed the fences. She was the mother of his child, the partner who stood by his side. The ranch was alive in a way it never had been before. There was laughter in the halls now, the sound of little feet running through the house, the scent of fresh flowers Tala had planted in the garden. Jacob found joy in the little things. His daughter's first smile, the way Tala looked at him when she thought he wasn't paying attention, the way the sun felt on his skin as he worked alongside his family. Jacob had spent so many years fearing the future, believing that he would never have the family he wanted, the legacy he dreamed of. But now, as he looked at his daughter and Tala, he realized that everything had changed. His life had meaning again. He had an heir, yes, but more importantly, he had a family, something he would cherish for the rest of his days. And so, the ranch thrived. Jacob, Tala, and their daughter built a life together one day at a time. The future was no longer uncertain. It was theirs to shape, to protect, and to live together.